Okay. Welcome to this month's Green Burial Council webinar. We're glad you're all here. This webinar is part of the Green Burial Council's monthly free webinar series. You'll see a donation QR code and link on your screen. Contributions help support future webinars and the behind-the-scenes work that makes these events possible, much of which is led by Maura Bobbitt and Krista Regalia, so thank you so much for both of them. Feel free to introduce in your chat feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Just so you know, this session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. The webinar will run about 45 minutes, followed by about 10 minutes for Q&A. You're welcome to post questions in the chat at any time, and we'll address them at the end. My name is Stephanie Drazen. I am the secretary for the Green Burial Council International. I'll be the host today, fielding some questions. But now that we've given everyone 5 minutes to join, we're going to go ahead and get started. So today's topic is cemetery soil science, managing ecosystems from the ground up. Soil is the foundation of every managed ecosystem, and cemeteries are no exception. In this presentation, we'll explore how soil science informs cemetery assessment, design, and management. Some topics include site assessment and suitability, burial depth considerations, botanical and forestry planning, species selection, and the chemistry of created remains. We hope you'll walk away with practical insight into how thoughtful soil stewardship works and supports both ecological integrity and the long-term success of natural burial cemeteries. So, I'm now going to introduce our speaker for the day. Our speaker is Michael J. Furniss. Michael is a wildland soil scientist who recently retired from the research branch of the Forest Service. He teaches and has consulted on climate change vulnerability and ecological approaches to forest management, both regionally, nationally, and internationally. He's an expert in natural and green cemetery development and cemetery forestry. Other areas of expertise include climate vulnerability of infrastructure, and he has conducted large-scale infrastructure vulnerability assessments on public lands. He's obsessed with cultivating communities of practice and effective communication to make a better world. He's chairman and longtime member of Arcata's Forest Management Committee, which governs its community forest, and a longtime board member of the Smith River Alliance. With that, I will go ahead and introduce Michael Furniss.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for showing up. Appreciate it. And I will try to share my screen here. I think that's it.
Perfect.
Okay, here we go. And I've changed the title just a little bit because in terms of soil, siting the cemetery is really the crucial thing. There's some management I'll talk about, but where you put them is super important. This is the first time I've given this particular talk, so bear with me here. But I've been thinking about this for a long time. And in fact, when I was studying soil science at University of California at Berkeley, I was sitting out in front of the agricultural building in the rain one day, and then just watching the rainfall percolate into the ground. And I thought, gee, when my time comes, I'd like to be buried in the root zone of a redwood. And that kind of stuck with me. And then I went on and did my career and thought about it from time to time and often looked and see if there was anywhere to do it and never really found a place where I could do that the way I wanted to. But then after I retired, I started working on this. And now we're within a month or two of actually opening a conservation burial ground. So it's been pretty exciting. We're down in the weeds, figuring out all the details that need to happen. And on we go. So I did hear somebody say a quote the other day and really cracked me up. And those of you that have developed cemeteries might, or done any big project might relate to this. And it is, we do this not because it's easy, but because we thought it would be easy. Anyway, yeah. So, but I can't complain. The inspiration and the way that we can help families is absolutely overwhelms all the little problems. So anyway, on we go. And special thanks to the Green Burial Council. I think these kinds of communities of practice are the key to many, many things in knowledge management and getting things right and best practices and continuity and all that. So it's hugely valuable. And as are these webinar series, I really appreciate it. And also just to acknowledge, I have a great board now. And I've also received a lot of wonderful advice and help from a couple of people, Lee Webster, who I think you all know, and also Marianne Perry, who was a longtime sexton at the Ashland Forest Memorial Burial Ground. So here we go. And one of the things I found is that if you want people to appreciate something and learn about it and take good care of it, you start with inspiration rather than a bunch of facts. And I do have a bunch of facts for you, but I'm going to start with an inspiration. And that is ways of thinking about soil. And I've been collecting these for many years, and they're metaphors or they're expressions of value. And so here we go. So we'll think of soil. If you're a cemetery manager, you think of soil as the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure that you're going to be working with. And that's what we'll mainly talk about. But you can also think of soil as capital. So soil is the ultimate form of capital, the true wealth of the land and the basic investment and infrastructure from which all our commodities flow. And and then if you're a plumber, you might think of it as the plumbing of the watershed. And most any watershed's plumbing is almost entirely inside the soil, where just billions upon billions of minute pathways, a great matrix of quadrillions of tiny streams and pathways, connected little pipes, and that's where they are. They're inside the soil. You can't see them, but or think of soil as a reservoir. This is how a farmer or a forester or a water district manager might see that soils hold these vast amounts of water hanging there and feeding ecosystems and promoting decomposition. So in a 3,000 acre watershed, it holds over 1 trillion gallons of water, and that's hanging there in the landscape. It doesn't come through into the streams. It's just sitting there as a reservoir. And so if you're a doctor, you might think of soil as a tissue. So it's like an organism turned inside out. It's alive, it has bones, it has a mineral part, it has organs, innumerable bacteria and fungi, actinomycetes, arthropods, all sorts of living parts. And they each have a function. And every gram of me has 5 billion live bacteria and miles of fungal mycelia and a lot else. So it has an enormous organic complex called humus, which is inside out membranes that filter and sort and harbor and exchange and nourish the whole system. And of course, the soil has blood, the soil water that flows through the capillaries and veins. And so if you're a mechanic, you might think of soil as the engine of the ecosystem. And the engine, it runs the productivity of the whole thing. And so you can think like this: the organic matter is the fuel, the decomposers are the cylinders, the food web is the cylinder firing order, the local environmental factors are my carburation. It's like the flywheel of the whole system, the whole ecosystem. You might think of it as the placenta of life on Earth. And this is from Nathaniel Shaler at about 1900. He said, the soil is like a placenta that enables living things to feed upon the earth. And this is how a mother might look at it. You can think of soil, especially if you're an astronomer or like stargazing, as stardust. So every 50,000 years or so, an inch of stuff falls on the earth from the burnup of meteors from space. And since I'm about 500,000 years old, that would make about 10 inches of stardust. So think of soil as stardust. If you're a chemist, you might think of soil as a chemical reactor. It's made of a lot of very small particles like clays and humus molecules, which have immense surface area. In typical soil, there are about 100 acres of surface area to the pound of soil. And these are active places where things live, where water and solids and air react, where things stick and adhere and exchange and absorb and cohere and all that. If you're a biologist, you might think of soil as habitat and a biodiversity anchor. The great biologist E.O. Wilson has said that a handful of me is like the Amazon rainforest, just more diverse. And so if you're a historian, you might think of soil as a historical record. And because soil forms the long-term record of land use and stewardship of each generation, it is absolutely accurate. It bears the imprint of our wisdom or our waste. It's the landscape's long-term memory. And FDR once said that the history of every nation is eventually uh, recorded in how it cares for its soils, eventually written in how it cares for its soils. And if you're a climate scientist, you can see soil as a carbon bank. So after the oceans, the soil are the largest stores of carbon on the earth. And forests and grasslands store most of their carbon in the soil. And at least a quarter of the total carbon storage is in the soil. And most of it is stored for a long time. If you're a minister, you can think of soil as the soul of the land. Humans and humus and humility all bound together in the same word. So the dark, productive earth is like your own vast interiority. And then finally, for those of us that might think we're getting a little old, you're not old. Soil is old. Soil is super old compared to our civilizations, even. It takes 10 or 20,000 years or more just to form 1 foot of soil. And that's why it's so valuable and so important to take good care of. So these are the 6 most important soil properties. And I'll go through each of these through the talk. So texture, which is the particle size distribution, the depth, sometimes talked about as thickness, porosity and infiltration capacity. This is really central, and I'll dwell on this a little bit. Organic matter and microbiota, water holding capacity, and then soil cover. So you've heard the aphorism about real estate. What are the 3 most important things about real estate? Well, here are the 3 most important things about cemetery soil assessment. It's the same. Location, location, location. And I'll go through each of these. I'll parse these out for you a little bit. So this is the where you put cemeteries is super important. So first of all, location, the geographic context, and this encompasses lots of things. I'll go through just a few of them. Location in terms of water proximity and the physics of the soil that you're dealing with, and the existing or potential erosion. And then finally, location, the decomposition and vegetation that we care so much about in green burial. So in terms of the geographic location, so where is the area that you're planning or maybe managing now with respect to things like topography, the geotechnical soil properties, the neighbors, water bodies, domestic water sources, access, and so on. And I'm really going to just talk about topography and geotechnical soil properties and water bodies, domestic water sources. Access is definitely a thing. Neighbors are a thing too, in terms of how your cemetery might affect them, but also how they may affect you in terms of sending their excess water your way, or other kinds of impacts that happen. So let's go over some of these things. In terms of topography, this is kind of a little bit of a risk continuum here. And very low gradient or flat gradient can be just fine, but often this is also accompanied by waterlogging, and waterlogging is something we definitely want to avoid. And so there is a small risk when you have a flat gradient. It doesn't say that you're in an unsuitable area, but it says there is a risk and you have to really worry about waterlogging. It's kind of ideal when you're at 2 to 6 degrees gradient. And then if you're greater than 9 degrees gradient, there's a real danger of surface water runoff, of surface and mass erosion, of flooding of graves, or rapid subsurface lateral migration of leachates. It's quite possible, recognizing the risk, that to put a cemetery on a steeper slope, and we have one here at Ferndale Cemetery in Northwest California, that's on a fairly steep slope, and it's doing just fine. So I didn't mention I'm coming to you from Northwest California, and it's just a little after 4 here. And so in terms of geotechnical suitability, there's a few things you need to be concerned about. First of all, can you dig to a minimum depth of about 6 feet without blasting? So if you have shallow bedrock or dense hard pan, this makes the site kind of unviable. And having to dig with a jackhammer or something else, you can do it, but it's a lot of trouble. And then secondly is stability. So the soil must hold vertical grave walls independently for several days without collapsing. to ensure safety during ceremonies. So if this collapses and spalls in, it's kind of a problem for the ritual and for the safety of those that are coming around it. So this is an important factor. It has to be strong enough and be stable enough. And then finally, workability. Can you manipulate the soil? Can you dig it without undue effort? And can you backfill it without being too clumpy and without being full of boulders? So, and then if you're going to plant anything, it has to be plantable and not too much rock. So, rock really matters here. And you can have a cemetery with a fairly high rock content, but it's going to be a little bit challenging for you. And then every place is different, and that's one of the things about the natural sciences is one size almost never fits all. And in fact, soils tend to be quite heterogeneous in a lot of places. If you're on a alluvial kind of farm soil, it might be pretty homogeneous. But a lot of places where we might want to put cemeteries, especially sort of out of town and away from the otherwise very useful land for development or for farming, that you may have a fairly complex mosaic of different kinds of soils, and you need to know how that lays out. And you can see in this illustration, there's quite a few different soils. And so you need a bespoke assessment. You need a particular assessment for a particular area. And it's not adequate to just go to the federal Natural Resource Conservation Service soil survey. Those are generally done only with a frame and a lens of agricultural suitability, and they tend to be quite generalized. They tend to incorporate several soils in each mapping unit, and you need to do a much more detailed assessment than what you're going to get from there. So if you're just using your local soil survey maps, you have a high risk of missing things and of getting it wrong. So there's three ways to lose soil thickness: erosion, excavation, and compassion. Just things that you need to watch out for. And I'll go into some detail about erosion. And this is, what a lot of the U.S. looked like during a period when we weren't too swift about soil conservation. This is not someplace you would want to site a cemetery. It's easy to see that this is eroding, but you have to look very carefully at signs of erosion. Cemeteries last forever, and even a small amount of erosion can make a really big difference over time. And this is, again, the Palouse in Washington State. You can see the amount of soil thickness that was lost here. And so you want to make sure that the site that you're picking and using and managing isn't losing soil. It isn't running downhill and decreasing the soil depth, soil thickness, and it's sort of exposing the cemetery to that. And it's fairly clear that many civilizations were lost to loss of soil. This is Easter Island, and the thinking is like the reason people left there is because they eroded all their topsoil away. And this has happened in innumerable countries where whole civilizations were lost because over time they lost their fertile mantle of soil. And so it's super important to make sure you pick a site that isn't highly vulnerable to this and that you manage it in a way that the soil stays there. And this is an old story in the United States of soil conservation, very important. And of course, Plato, who seemed to have thought of everything, I'll just read this for you. The rich, soft soil has all run away, leaving the land nothing but skin and bone. But in those days, the damage had not taken place. The hills had high crests. The rocky plain of Phalus was covered with rich soil, and the mountains were covered by thick woods, of which there are some traces today. So it's very important to keep soil in place. It forms very slowly. It's essentially non-renewable in human timescales, and there isn't anything more important than making sure the soil that you have stays in place. And then sometimes there are landslides, and this one's super obvious, and obviously nobody's going to put a cemetery on this site, but there's other places where it's not so obvious, and you need to look, see if the soil is creeping or flowing. We have lots of earth flows in California that kind of look like this, or they're much more subtle, but they're slowly moving down the slope, and you have to be able to notice that. And so don't excavate soils. This is one of the things where we lose soils a lot, not just from erosion, but actually from basically bulldozers. and it's usually irreversible and degrades the soil thickness. And so it's building roads and trails and parking areas in a developed cemetery. It's really important to minimize the excavation of soil. And the more you excavate, the more you lose, and the more problems that you're going to make for yourself. And so what's called texture, and that's the particle size distribution of soil. And then basically soil, and this is a big generalization, but it's about half solid material and half sort of empty space or space that's occupied by water or air. And the more water there is, the less air, the more air, the less water. And then there's a mineral portion and an organic portion. It makes up about half of it. So typical soils, most soils, almost all soils are highly porous. They've got pores all through them and they're like sponges. And it's important to recognize that. And then we look at three different particle sizes. We classify three different particle sizes. And so clay, besides being a material, is also a particle size, is very, very small and has tremendous surface area. And so this is a very important component. And this is where a lot of the purification and holding of nutrients and decomposition potential is in the clay. You don't want too much of it, but you definitely want some. And then silt is a kind of an in-between size. And then sand, we know what the size of sand is, especially when it's in our shoe or something like that. And so the combination of these different particle sizes make up the texture of the soil. And then here's the classic diagram of soil texture. And a loam is basically just a balanced distribution of these different particle sizes. You may think, oh, loam is just like dark and yummy looking soil, but it's really just a balanced particle size distribution. And so we got clay on this side, silt on this side, and sand on this side. And so when we look for where's the sweet spot or what do we want in terms of a cemetery soil, and a soil that you can trust is going to do the job of decomposition, keeping pollutants in place, promoting decomposition, which we want to do in green burial. We're looking at somewhere in here. And this is my best guess, but a clay loam, a loam, sandy clay loam, silt loam, a little sandy loam. These are all quite suitable, and they're pretty common. It's like you might get the impression it's like, oh, there's so many constraints here, I'll never find a place to do this. But these are actually, it's not that hard to find places that have these kinds of soils. But if you're in a real sandy soil, it's totally unsuitable. The things won't decompose well. The water passes through too quickly. If you're in a very clayey soil, it'll be waterlogged and you'll get adipocere formation and that. So super important. And then you sort of looking for that Goldilocks texture. So if it's too coarse, it's too permeable. Fluid movement is too rapid. On the next one, it's too fine. It's a clay or very silty. And this waterlogging creates anaerobic conditions. So if there's water in the soil, most of the time there isn't any air, or there's very little air, and you get anaerobic conditions, which means low oxygen. And you have that halts decomposition, and it leads to the formation of adipocere, which we don't want. So grave wax, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And then just right. This is the Goldilocks saying, whereas you have 20 to 40% clay mineral content, it's deep to bedrock, no hard pan, and that balances aerobic decomposition with effective leachate filtration and heavy metal attenuation. So this is a very important property of soil. It's like, what is its particle size distribution, and especially how well does water move through it or not. In terms of soil depth, soils have horizons. So everybody's like just familiar with this. You have the dark horizon at the top usually, and then a lighter horizon down below, and then sort of more of a broken up rock horizon. And most soils have this horizonation. If they're very, very young, or they just kind of fell into place or flowed into place, they might not have a lot of horizon, but most of them have a significant horizon. And this comes into play with backfilling. And you definitely want to put this stuff on the top, which is the most biologically active, the most fertile, and the best at decomposing things. You want to put that aside when you're excavating, and be sure to put that back on top when you're filling the grave back in. Super important. And then this, if you can find places where you can actually mine a little bit of this material, it can be very helpful for neutralizing cremated remains or putting down in the grave site to promote decomposition. So the most important soil again is that area near the surface. This is pretty dramatic horizonation here, but this level that is enriched by organic matter near the top is super important. Put it aside and put it back where it was, and just recognize that soil is not vertically homogeneous. And then the biological activity falls off with depth. And this is why we want shallow burials. So don't worry about the units here, but as you go down in the soil, the biological activity drops off very quickly. And as you go back to the top, the biological activity goes up very fast. So that's an important thing to notice, and that's why we certainly don't want to go 6 feet down. It's just a mistake, and it's unnecessary. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about burial depth as we go. So, and in terms of soil water physics, porosity and infiltration capacity, super important. The soil pores, all these little spaces inside of the soil, are what really makes it work. It makes watersheds work, it makes soils fertile, it makes everything work. And it's very, very important. And this is kind of the permeability measurements in terms of different kinds of land uses. And I always hawk the forest or also the pasture being considerably higher permeability than anything that we usually deal with in our cities. And then if you have different kinds of excess overland flow that can happen. So when it just rains harder than the soil can take the water in, you get an overland flow condition. And you should look at your site when it's raining really hard and see if you have this or how much of it you have. But there's also another condition where the soil is simply full of water and saturated, and no more can go in, and then you'll get some runoff as well. So you need to know how much of this is happening in your area. The best way to do that is to be out there when it's raining really hard. And then in terms of ground cover, there's a strong relationship between ground cover and how much runoff is happening. And you can see pretty clearly on the left, well covered, not much surface runoff. All the way on the right, it's poor ground cover and lots of surface runoff. So that's just kind of a general principle you can follow, and why we want most of the soil to be covered most of the time. And then impermeable surfaces, lots of runoff in our towns and roads and cities and whatnot. Tremendous surface runoff. Not so much out in the natural ground or in the forest, and we have less surface runoff. And it's important to try to maintain that condition. And without good cover, you have less infiltration, more sediment movement, more runoff, and then sediment deposits. So we want a fully stocked vegetation. It doesn't have to be trees, but we want a fully stocked vegetation out there. And so what do we want in terms of soil porosity? And this is basically the sweet spot, is that 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the minus 3 centimeters per second permeability. And that's about an eighth to 1.4 inches per hour. And then so this is very important in terms of contamination potential and setbacks. So you have enough contact time for biological filtration while preventing waterlogging, anaerobic conditions, and adipocere formation. And then the ideal range should be established by professional site-specific deep soil testing. I would say that just note that a lot of the technology and assessment science for this comes from septic fields. We have millions of septic fields out there. Many people that aren't on some sort of city sewage facility use a septic field. And in fact, a septic field, a family of four, generates more pollutant type waste in a single day to the septic field than a decomposing body does over its whole decomposition cycle. So you'll say, well, this is going to contaminate the groundwater. It's like it won't, just the way the septic fields don't, if they're properly sited and properly assessed. So this is a permeability assessment for septic fields. And you can see at the bottom this percolation testing. And this used to be the standard. You just pour a hole full of water and see how quickly it infiltrates and goes away. It's not adequate anymore. You need a full landscape analysis, especially with a deep pit. So if you're going to go down and say dig a 4 foot deep grave, you need to see how it handles water in the bottom of that site. And you need to be out there in seasonal times when it may be different than in the summer, for example. And then a landscape analysis, so looking at the whole picture there, and then also percolation testing as well. Um, so groundwater pollution is something that comes up a lot, and it's really not, pretty much, in my view, not a problem at all if you have a good soil that you can trust. And that's not that hard to do, but it does take assessment, and you have to get that right. Whoops. Um, so very little of the material that comes off the bodies travels much at all. If you have a decent soil, it generally takes care of it right locally. Heavy metals are very sticky. They have multiple positive charges, and the soil is largely negatively charged. And the heavy metals just stick and they stay. And the organics break down really quickly. And then you definitely want to avoid anaerobic conditions where there's low oxygen. And then I already told you about the comparison with septic fields. And so protecting groundwater is a matter of making sure that below the bottom of the grave, you have a buffer zone before you hit the groundwater. Not every place has groundwater, but most places do. And sometimes that's high up in the profile, and sometimes it's way down there. But you need to kind of know where that is, not just permanently, but also seasonally. So when it's super wet out there, the landscape's super wet, how high is the water table? And you need to be 3 to 8 feet above that with the bottom of the grave. That's kind of a basic best practice in terms of making sure that the pollutants don't get away. And there's a thing called the vadose zone where it's an unsaturated zone sort of below the subsoil. Um, and you want an effective vadose zone that isolates the soil that you're going to be burying in from the saturated aquifer. And so here's kind of a summary of best practices. And then there's 3 with asterisks on them, means that they're not essential, but they're something that you should worry about. Topographic slope, distance to water. You should be something like more than 200 meters from potable wells and 50 meters from streams. These are usually not statutory limits, but they may be set by your county, possibly by your state health authority, and they may have somewhat different values. I think actually 100 feet, this would be more like 300 feet from streams. 100 feet's enough from a stream, again, if you have a decent soil. Depth to water table, you don't want any flooding hazard. Flooding of cemeteries is bad news. And it's not hard to determine what flooding hazard is. If you have a significant flooding hazard, if you have any flooding hazard, let's say, it's not a place for a cemetery. Depth to bedrock, mentioned that again. Whoops. Soil texture. So these are the textures that are ideal that can take care of the filtration of the leachate and avoid waterlogging. Soil rock content. You could get by with more than 25% soil rock content, but it's going to be hard on you, very hard on the grave digging, and can be hard in terms of the stability of the grave wall. And then soil organic matter is highly desirable to be more than 2%. And so adipocere, the grave wax or corpse wax or mortuary wax, this is to be avoided. And it forms in anaerobic conditions where there's low or no oxygen. And it forms from the fatty tissue. Bacteria generally do that, and they're anaerobic bacteria. And if you're in low or zero oxygen conditions, adipocere will tend to form. And it's highly resistant to decomposition. It can stick around for a long time, which is not what we want in green burial. We're trying to promote decomposition, being real decomposition positive and integrated into the ecosystem quickly. And adipocere is largely impermeable and soluble in water. And so get your soil assessment right. And so avoid waterlogging, ensure a well-drained, aerated burial site. Avoid unsuited, poorly drained soils with low permeability or high water table. So waterlogging is bad, and it's going to promote the formation of adipocere, which we really don't want. And so we want to favor that rapid or aerobic, which means there's oxygen around, decomposition. And so don't seal caskets. And I don't think we're really doing that in green burial, but you see the fancy metal caskets in the funeral home, and often they're sealed, and that's one of the selling points. Or you can actually buy special gaskets that will seal them up even better. And you're almost surely going to get adipocere formation and anaerobic conditions if you have a sealed system. The seals eventually don't last, but there's no reason to do that unless you really want to preserve the corpse a long time, and you're okay with adipocere. But on the contrary, we in green burial, I think we want to promote decomposition, and we want, if we're going to use a casket, not a shroud, we want that to be very permeable. And holes in the bottom is a good thing, and loose joints and all that, so that air and the water and all that can get in, and things can come out and be processed by the soil filtration. Um, and don't irrigate plants on graves unless the irrigation amounts are soil water savvy. That is, you don't put on so much water that it makes it down to the level of where the burial has happened. Otherwise, you might be promoting the anaerobic conditions in the adipocere, depending on how much irrigation you might be doing. So, if you're planting a tree or trees, and that lots of people seem to want that now, plant it adjacent to the grave and not on the grave would be ideal. And that's fine in terms of the remains rising into the trees and that. So 1, 2 feet to the side is enough, but we don't advocate planting trees directly on the grave, and it's not necessary for having a tree as a monument. So. And then there's just a couple of ideas. You could cover the site during heavy rain with, waxy canvas or something, or removing snowpack. If there's a bunch of snowpack on the grave, you could remove that so that the snow melt doesn't seep in and create waterlogging conditions. Um, and then there's lots of other things you can do in heavy, low permeability soils. You could add sand below and around the casket or the shroud. But these really are conditions that you would like to avoid in the first place. And so that's where the soil assessment comes in. It's like, if you find that it's a waterlogging kind of situation, you might want to look somewhere else for where to site the cemetery. And so decomposition and plant growth, again, these are the things that matter for that: texture, thickness, porosity, water holding, organic matter, soil cover. And then in terms of burial depth, green burial is shallow, and there's a bunch of reasons why that works best. And so excavation to 3 to 4 feet is adequate, depending on the vertical dimension of the body or the casket. And so really the control on depth is how much soil or dirt, often in the statutes, is on top of the casket or the shroud. And in California, it's 12 to 18 inches. 12 inches, 18 inches for a single burial and 12 inches for a double burial. And there are other states also that have as little as 12 inches. And I got to tell you, everybody says, and I'm sure you've heard this, it's like, oh, 18 inches, those animals will dig you up. They won't. Uh, if animals were digging up bodies, these statutes would not exist. They would be changed quickly. But the state rules do differ on burial depth, and some of them are too deep and just basically ignorant. And some of them are sort of, California has a lot of rules, but this one is enlightened. You don't need more than 1.5 feet or even a foot of soil on top of a body as a smell barrier, and to keep animals from digging you up. And they just don't dig up bodies at that depth. And for several reasons. One, as Lee Webster says, we just don't smell that good. Um, but also, animals didn't evolve with food at that depth, and it's a lot of work to dig that deep, and they just don't do it. They might disturb a fresh grave on the surface looking for grubs and whatnot, and that's something that to look for and manage. But there's no evidence that animals are digging up bodies that are buried shallow. And there's been tons and tons of shallow burials over time. So it's not an issue, but it will be something that comes up, and you kind of have to talk people out of it. And I had quite a discussion with our chair of the planning commission here in the county about this. And people just naturally say, that's not deep enough. And there is kind of this 6 foot under kind of idea that you have to get them down, way down there. And it's just a mistake to do that. And then the shallow burial is ideal for decomposition. And the higher you go in the soil profile, the more biologically active it is, the more organic matter there is, the better the decomposition is going to work. And it also puts you further from the groundwater. So anyway, so very shallow, super important. And then in terms of cremated remains, this is a large area where we're doing some research because there's a paucity of research on it. And there are a couple of problems with cremated remains in terms of plant growth. But I believe they're quite exaggerated. And the idea that ashes, people call them ashes, so I like to call them ashes actually, and use term people that understand and know. You sound like a nerd when you say cremains. Um, they basically are kind of high in salts, especially sodium, which is left over from cremation. It doesn't burn up. And they're also a high pH. Um, but they're not really highly reactive. They just kind of sit there. And the sodium content is not all that high. I live near the coast, and we have a lot of sodium in our soils. But these things are something to worry about. And if you put a whole bunch of cremated remains in a hole and then plant something there, a tree or a bush or something like that, you're going to impact the plant. You probably won't kill it, but it's going to be set it back a ways, and it's just not a good practice. However, cremated remains or ashes are largely calcium and phosphorus, and both of these are what we call macronutrients. They're both chronically short in soils, and they make a great fertilizer. Really tremendous fertilizer, slow release fertilizer, if you can treat them in the right way. And especially calcium is magic for plant nutrition. Plants need some calcium, but the root system and the plant nutrient uptake system really thrives on calcium. And that's one of the reasons lime is so effective in agriculture. It's not just bringing the pH up, but also putting a lot of calcium in the root zone, which really makes the plant nutrient uptake system sort of light up. And so the practices for that is to spread the cremains, spread the ashes, don't concentrate them. So spread them over a considerably large area, and you should be fine. And the system really isn't going to see it. Um, and if you look at how much soil is actually out there relative to the amount of putting 7 or 8 pounds of ashes on the thing, if you spread them out well, you really aren't going to impact the system much at all. And the salts will leach out very quickly. Sodium has only +1, and it lets go very easily and can easily be pushed off the system by calcium and magnesium and other things. So you can leach out the salts if you wish. You want to just rinse the cremated remains, and you could just put water in there and then pour it out. I guess it's kind of the holy water once you do that, so you could do something with it. But it leaches the salts out very quickly. But also just rainfall over time will leach the salts out quite quickly. It's not a huge problem. If you're in the desert where you're very short of water and rainfall, it's a little bit more of a problem. You want to spread it out more widely, or actually leach out the salts before you put them on there. I would mix with topsoil. Best thing you could use is just basically topsoil to mix the ashes with, or using an acidic compost. You have to know that it is an acidic compost with considerable neutralizing power. Elemental sulfur works well. I've tried it with vinegar, and you can drop the pH very quickly with just adding vinegar, and then age it for a few weeks or months. And then so you're basically taking something that can be a little bit problematic for plant growth, um, and making it into super bonus slow release fertilizer. In green burial, we're not too excited about cremation, and we want to provide an alternative to that. I'm particularly concerned about the air quality effect of cremation. But lots of people do it, and I think we need to honor the way people want to go and the way they want to be treated after they die. And I don't think we should shame people for getting cremated. I don't think it's right. And we can dispose put this stuff out on the ground. And then consider not introducing offsite microbiota. There is compost for sale from Missouri, and I just don't get why you would take compost and microbiota from Missouri and put it anywhere other than in Missouri. Doesn't make sense to me. And plus, that material is completely undisclosed as to what it is, or what its pH is, or what its neutralizing power is. And so just use some of the native O or A horizons to stay native. Um, and of course, you probably heard about um, the mushroom suit, and people think you have to put fungi into the grave. You don't. And don't put anything non-native in there if you have a native ethic anyway, and many do. The soil has its own biota. And in fact, if you put something in from offsite, it's likely just going to be eaten by the things that are already well adapted to the site. So we don't need to put in fungi. We don't need to put in exotic compost from far away. You can use some of the topsoil. And we're looking into this further. I have a chemist and another soil chemistry expert. We're working on this because there is a paucity of information about how to make ashes suitable to use as fertilizer, or most suitable, or how widely to spread them, or how the chemistry of the ashes versus the soil work. Um, and then if you want to bury them in a container that's closed, that's fine. You put them in a container that isn't going to break down, and that's an okay thing to do. So, and having a rich cover of vegetation is very important for water table management and contaminate filtration and general soil health. So it doesn't have to be trees, but close cropped grass doesn't really cut it. If you're going to have grasses, you should look for deep rooted grasses and give them a little chance to grow rather than make it look like a lawn. We're not really in the lawn cemetery business here for the most part. So and soil organic matter and organisms. We have tremendous, this is just an absolute churning urn of burning funk here. This is a unbelievably diverse system that's absolutely full of all sorts of creatures. And it's what does the job for us. We have a food web with bacteria and fungi. Fungi get all the love these days, but the bacteria are just as amazing, or even more so, in terms of the things that they do, and in terms of their numbers everywhere. And they're largely beneficial. Microarthropods are everywhere. And then mycorrhizae, the fungi that have a special relationship with plant roots and go out and get nutrients for them. And I have no doubt that they can mine ashes for phosphorus. No problem. They can do that even up against rocks. So it shouldn't be any problem to acquire phosphorus for plants, which are very often very short of. And then nematodes and protozoa. And this is a whole topic here of soil microbiology. Super interesting, super hard to study, but is really the thing that runs the whole place. So stewardship basically prevents soil erosion, and this is maintaining porosity, soil cover, avoid compaction, excavation, avoid concentration of runoff, prompt vegetation, prevent wildfires, keep them small and not severe, and then keep roads to a minimum and follow best practices in road planning, design, construction, maintenance, and decomposition. This has been my bread and butter, to try to be able to have roads, which of course we do need, but have them not have excessive impact on the environment, and especially on water systems. Soil cover, just very quickly, very important. And we don't want to leave too much of the soil uncovered for too long. For erosion control, everything works. But for soil health, fine organic matter, horizon material from the forest four letter, that's the best. That's what these systems eat. And soil health is basically supported by a continuous supply of organic matter. And then I have to tell you that almost all of the forest systems, anyway, in California are subject to wildfire. And you hear about this in the news all the time. But all systems change and they're all dynamic. And change is not necessarily bad, but you have to realize that your snapshot in time is not necessarily how it's going to stay. And it's really important to understand that and say, well, what happens when the forest burns up? What are we going to do? How do we relate to that? How do we talk to our families about that and all that? You definitely want to be looking at that. Um, and nobody's going to put a cemetery here, but things can get pretty dynamic when after a big wildfire. And then after fires, organic matter and live cover is best at feeding the soil. And then I'm kind of out of time. We want to get to questions. Just want to mention that water is fractionated by soil in the landscape. And you have green water that's hanging there and doesn't leave the system and feeds the plants over time. This is a lot. And then blue water that drains through the soil and ends up in the little streams and the rivers and that. And so it kind of looks like this. And this isn't, I don't have a practical thing for you here other than when you irrigate, if you irrigate, you want to provide available water, but not too much excess water if you're worried about waterlogging conditions. So when it rains on there, you get water that hangs in the soil and is available to plants. And then beyond that, and the plants in this system get it first. And beyond that, you get excess water that comes out and comes into rivers and streams and that. So, and we call that green water and blue water. And then finally, I wanted to talk about conservation burial and how important that is. And really, cemeteries should be forever. And as you probably know, many of them are not. They don't have any guarantee of perpetuity. And then perpetuity is really in our development and our board values, perpetuity is our watchword. So cemeteries should be perpetual. And an important element of that is conservation easements and a really key tool. And Lee Webster has been really articulate about this. And they're not that hard to establish. And there's land trusts all over the place. These larger conservation easements can be funded. We just got $1.5 million from the state of California mitigation money to put a conservation easement on the ranch that we're working on. And they have large tax benefits too. So if people donate that conservation easement, they get huge tax benefits, and that's part of the federal law. And then just mention that there was a Scientific American article a few years ago that cemeteries are biodiversity hotspots. So humans respect cemeteries, and they tend to be very long-lasting hotspots for biodiversity. And it's worth noting that. So here are some takeaways, and then we'll go to questions. So basically, soil is the fundamental cemetery infrastructure. And so actually the word fundament it means the soil. The firmament's the sky and the fundament is the earth. And soil is the fundament of cemetery infrastructure. And secondly, every place is different. And you can expect lots of differences place to place. And so you need a site-specific soil assessment. And a good soil survey for cemetery use is an essential best practice when you're siting a cemetery or you're looking at a place and say, is this going to work? And just looking at the agriculturally focused soil maps is not adequate. You can start with them. They're useful information for sure, but just relying on that, you can make some big mistakes. And then an unsuitable soil is an unsuitable cemetery. And so try not to get this part wrong. Get the soil right, and then you can trust that soil to do the job. And then it needs to be deep enough and strong enough and permeable enough and diggable. So all those things, you'll get out there and dig some holes. Ideally, you'd get a backhoe or an excavator and dig a bunch of holes and see what you really have and see what that infrastructure actually looks like. You can't tell from the surface. Unfortunately, that's one of the challenges of soil science. You have to dig holes, and digging holes ain't easy. So And then soil permeability is absolutely crucial and needs a balance. It has to be in the sweet spot, not too fast and not too slow. And then proximity to water bodies and water supplies is really crucial. And you have to honor that. And so with that, I'll go to questions. And thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry I tend to speak too fast. It's just I'm from New Jersey. I can't help it. So
No
thanks.
problem. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Um, so we do have a couple questions in the chat. First of which, um, would you be willing to share the slide deck? If so, we can send it out with our resources like after the fact.
Yes, I can share the deck.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then those of you that were registered, you will get the deck sent to you. Um, Then the first question we have is, would covering recent graves with local wood chips, so something, native to the area, ever be appropriate to suppress invasive or aggressive native plants?
Absolutely. Mulch is magic. So yeah, covering with wood chips would be great. I'd highly recommend that. You might the wood chips or woody material like that have a kind of a high nitrogen demand because they don't have enough nitrogen in them to support their own decomposition. So adding some nitrogen fertilizer, grass clippings, blood meal, something like that, um, will prevent the upper layers of the soil from becoming nitrogen deficient. But I wouldn't let that discourage me from mulching the top of graves. I think that's a good thing to do.
Okay. Next question from Dr. Cunningham. What else besides selenium power could be applied inside a grave to neutralize mercury from human livers and body stores?
Um, I my sense. Yeah, hello, Dr. Cunningham. We've talked about mercury before. My sense is that there's not mercury is not very mobile in the ground, and the amount of it that you're going to find in a body is pretty small. Um, but I don't know how you might neutralize that. It isn't going to go away. It's an element, so it doesn't decompose ever. And I've actually seen mercury mines where there's little balls of mercury on the rocks, and they've been there for a long, long time. So, but it is a good area of research and worth looking at, and I do appreciate your focus on that, Dr. Cunningham. And I think it's an important thing, and it's a darn good reason to avoid cremation, actually, because the mercury in amalgam tooth fillings volatilizes. It's not left behind. It goes into the air, and mercury in the air is pretty much it's a huge bummer. So if you do have mercury, probably the best thing to do is make sure you bury it, and then approaches to neutralize that might be worth having a good look at.
Okay, what do we do about areas whose topsoil were partially cleared? We have some areas prior to our operation where someone used a backhoe to clear out dead ash trees. We're working on mitigating the invasive species that have come in those areas. Is a soil amendment appropriate? If so, leaf litter, on-site wood chip compost, what would be best?
I think getting a vegetative cover back would be best, as long as you can, get that to be native if that's what you want. So vegetation cover is better than just mulch or wood chips or slash or something like that. But getting it covered quickly. But in the meantime, putting a mulch cover on there, wood chips or straw. We like to use rice straw here because it tends to be very low in weeds. Um, but you do if you're putting compost or straw or wood chips, you do need to worry that it's weed free. Otherwise, you might be introducing an invasive and really doing some damage by that. And so, compost needs to get really hot to kill all the weed seeds. And if you're going to use compost, you should make sure that it's certified compost that's weed free. So there is a danger there of just putting stuff out there when you're not sure what's in it. So, and then make sure that that areas that have been compacted, say by the wheels of the backhoe or something like that, are kind of you want to kind of scratch those up or even rip those up with a small bulldozer or something, depending on how severe the clearing has been. But yeah, these systems tend to be quite regenerative. So if you're patient and good to them in terms of cover, they'll come back quickly in any place that has sufficient rainfall.
Okay, I have three more questions, or maybe four, depending on how much time you have. This one should be quick. You stated proximity to water and water supplies is crucial. You mean it's important to stay away from them, correct?
That's right. Yeah, setbacks from either a live stream or a water body, or considerable setbacks from domestic water supply sources, wells mainly. And the neighbors will probably let you know about their well, and will worry about it. So stay well back from those features. And the standard in California, it's not statutory, but it's best practice, is about 100 feet back from any stream or lake. And that should be fine.
About how many bodies are recommended per acre?
Well, the Green Burial Council standard for conservation burial is 300 graves per acre. Um, and or 400 if you've roped some areas off and are not going to bury there. 300 graves per acre is about a 12 by 12-foot plot, so it's a big plot, and it's a typical conventional cemetery is 1,000 to even 1,400 graves per acre. So the low density is, if that's what you want. I'm not sure a higher density is necessarily bad, other than it might have some visual problems. Um, but we don't want to bury in a way that is not a particularly hard impact. And so, higher burial density is not necessarily a bad practice. But I like the idea of the 300 graves per acre or less that the GBC prescribes for conservation burial certification.
Um, So we've got a number of questions coming in, but we are already over time. I'll ask a few more, and then as you guys see, Michael has his contact information on the screen. So feel free to reach out with specific questions. Um, is there a beneficial correlation between microbes that exist in our bodies and the microbes most active around the rhizomes of growing tree roots? Are they similar?
No, they're totally different. Yeah. Things that live in us are not the same as might live in the root zone or in that rhizosphere. So no, they're a different thing entirely. Um, that said, bodies are almost entirely made of plant nutrients and soil enhancers. And so there are trace minerals here and there, which I think, mercury is a special issue, but by and large, we're made of fertilizer. And putting bodies in the ground where we set them up to decompose is really good for the system. And we like to say that we're planting people, or we're integrating people into the native ecosystem. And that's kind of our objective and marketing. And do you want to be integrated into a beautiful ecosystem, or do you want to be sort of locked away in a buried mausoleum, which is the conventional approach these days? So, um,
Well,
so
then I
yeah,
have
yeah.
maybe one good question to end on. What are some of the most beneficial nutrients that a human body offers soil and plant life via conservation burial?
Yeah, well, carbon is really good for the soil. It feeds everything. And then the things that are most often in short supply are nitrogen and phosphorus and calcium, and then sometimes micronutrients. Sometimes, potassium's often short in the east. It's almost never short in the west, but yeah, so and if you look at what we're made of, these are the things that we are made of. So um, we are Uh, when we're above ground, we're humans. When we're below ground, in the right setting, we're fertilizer. And there's questions come up about when we plant near trees, near existing trees, for example, or planted trees for that matter. Aren't we disturbing the roots? And it's like, roots like to be disturbed, and they're highly aggressive and highly opportunistic. And if they see nutrients, boom, they're all over them. So if we put some around here, if we put some hay out on the ground, say put a couple of inches of hay on the ground, next season they're actually full of redwood roots. So don't worry about roots, and you want to try to not cut any anchor roots or the large roots. And there's best practices for avoiding those. But even if you do cut them, I've talked to grave diggers, and they haven't seen any trees go over when they cut the big roots when they plant somebody right next to a tree, which does happen. So yeah. So pat
Okay,
yourself on the back. You're made of fertilizer.
great. Well, thank you, Michael, for your time today.
My
Um,
pleasure.
I can see you have this on the screen, but if our audience wanted to follow you or stay in touch, other than email, is there another good way to do that?
Yeah, if you go to sacred-grove.org, we have a sign up form and you get on our mailing list. And I just hired a new newsletter editor, so we'll have a newsletter out coming out soon. And then we'll announce our opening, which is imminent. And we'll post our price list and rules and regs and all that. So that's the way to keep in touch with us there. And yeah, get on our mailing list, and we'd love to keep you informed. And I would say, maybe I said this already. Oh yeah, well, there's communities of practice that are sort of in the same business or have the same interest. That's the key thing. And there's nothing better. And when you want things, you build a community of practice, and they do it for you. So hats off to Green Burial Council and the Conservation Burial Alliance for being there, and setting best practices and holding webinars and connecting people together. And it's a homage to that work.
Thank you. All right. With that, if you found this webinar valuable, please consider donating to the Green Burial Council. Your support helps us continue offering these programs. So thank you very much. Um, Sorry, I got navigated away from my screen. Um, Additionally, this webinar has been recorded. Registered attendees will receive a link to the recording and any shared resources, including that slide deck. And it will also be available on our YouTube channel. You can also find past webinars on our YouTube channel if you'd like to continue learning. And thank you to Michael and all of you for joining us and your interest in green burial. Have a great night.
Thank you.